a lot of our actions to this day, despite us always talking about how much we've grown, how much we changed, is still rooted in the ways in which white is the standard. It's never wrong to be successful. It's only wrong when you're going about it in a way that I myself see as toxic, and that toxic way is due to how society is so patriarchal.
Colorism. Prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a darker skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. But it is so far from simple. Colorism is an issue that has plagued the Black community, society really, for centuries.
So how have you guys seen colorism reflected in society as a whole?
There is a division growing up, and you see it as they grow up, and you see them, especially as they get older, how they identify as themselves. But yeah, you definitely see it in women especially.
Speaking of... Oh, no, you can go, Michelle. No, you can go.
I want to bring up a point that I thought about after hearing Jonathan speak. So I've been reading this book. I'm almost done with it because it's so good. And basically, in the book, she touched on the ways in which certain things occur, and it's still occurring because basically she said that we need to own our, because basically, like, in one of the chapters about love, especially within like the Black community, she touched on the fact that a lot of our actions to this day, despite us always talking about how much we've grown, how much we've changed, is still rooted in the ways in which white is the standard. Especially like when Jonathan talked about like having a light skin or like a white girlfriend is seen as successful, and it's like, especially for Black men, it's like, I won't speak for them, and many may disagree with me when watching this video, but in many ways, and what I've observed in my life, they want to be successful. And in many ways, this need and like thirst for, and it's never wrong to be successful. It's only wrong when you're going about it in a way that I myself see as toxic, and that toxic way is due to how society is so patriarchal. And it's basically like in the book, he talks about how for Black men, it's always how far away am I from white men, because they're seen as like the people who are the most successful in society, and how high am I from like Black women, because it's like the white man had the white woman. So if I want to be successful like the white man, I also have to have the white woman. It's the same way in school. If you were gifted and talented, others around you in the Black community would say, you're trying to be white, you're speaking white, because that's the standard. So it's like, you want the perfect wife, white. You want to be seen, taken seriously, you want to excel in school, white. And people fail to understand that it's not white or Black, it's who has the most resources, who has the most opportunities. Because if I'm with someone who is of lighter skin than me, in that setting, okay, yeah, sure, like, you're more successful. When you get up and sit next to a white person, you're gonna be seen in the same way that you saw me. And at that point, you should be understanding that it's not about the color of your skin, it's about what resources you have available and who's willing to give you resources and hear you out, especially who's willing to hear you out and accept you and not use you as a token. Because that's also something that people don't understand. And I feel like that's a big issue as well, in terms of like, not many do it, but there are those who take the privilege of having fairer skin and see it as a benefit in a way where like they allow themselves to become a token and not realize that in many ways they're being used, or they're being, I know, like for my cousin, for example, who's like, she's very light, she always says that a lot of men, only talk to her because he's light skinned. It's like a fetish. Like, I want you because you're light skinned. I don't have to know your name. I don't have to know what's your favorite food. You're light skinned, so I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to approach you. I'm going to disrespect you and catcall you on the street. And sometimes it's like, you have to understand when like you're being used and how it doesn't benefit you. Like, I'll be honest, as a girl, yeah, it's nice to be heard, like, yeah, I'm pretty and all that stuff. Like, it's nice to be given compliments. But if most of those compliments are rooted in the the breaking down of someone else, then it's not, for me personally, it's not really a compliment.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times people fail to realize it, and that's why till this day, and probably 2030 and 2040, we're going to continuously have this conversation until people own it up and address it. Like the first step in solving any problem is addressing the problem. But we, not just as a Black community, but as America as a whole and other countries, refuse to acknowledge issues.
America is notorious for, instead of acknowledging issues, sort of pushing it under the rug. Yep, brushing it under the rug. So that brings me to my next question. Why, because Michelle, you're so right, until this issue is addressed, it's still gonna be so prevalent 10, 20, however many years from now. Because I know sometimes, like if you use the term light skin privilege, which I think we were sort of getting at here in terms of how dark skinned women get the worst of it, you say the term light skin privilege, or how even though we're all Black, light skins have it a little bit better because that's just how it is. People get offended, right? Why do you think that colorism, in terms of how it's used to negatively treat one another and how it's denied in the Black community, why do you think that is still happening? Why do you think that's still a thing to this day in the Black community?
For me, I think it's still happening because it's attributed to our history. We do not discuss things. Most Black people just tend to let it go, move on. And for the Black community, I can understand. They think that there are bigger things to deal with, such as, like, if you put it in comparison, if you give people the option to discuss colorism within your own community, say, give it to Black men to discuss colorism in your own community, or to discuss racism for the whole Black community, they're going to choose racism. It's just how it is. And that's where we kind of falter, because many think there's bigger issues to deal with than colorism. And then there are those individuals that simply don't believe colorism is real. They think that people are making it up, that Black women are just creating a narrative because they're not being seen. And it's unfortunate because colorism does exist. And there are many examples of colorism existing, not just in the music industry, which I've written about, but also throughout history. It's just showcased. And then there are certain individuals who know that colorism is real, and they still perpetuate the ideologies of colorism. So they don't want to have the eyes and blame on them, so they avoid it in all of its entirety. Like when I did that research and I got 61 women to participate in my survey, but I can only get like 15 men out of the 50 plus men that I contacted to participate in the survey, because they didn't want to disclose the reasons why they didn't want to participate. And I don't want to, assume why, but, many researchers would assume that it was because they perpetuate the ideologies of colorism. So they just don't want to expose themselves. So there's many reasons and facets on why colorism is not dissipating and will most likely be going on 10, 20, 30 years because we're not addressing it. And Eve from, what's that thing called? The Talk or Review, something. Those two had the opportunity as Black women in our Black community who have that platform on daytime TV when they were discussing colorism back in like June 22nd of 2019. They dispelled it and was like, let's stop talking about it, let's move on. And that's the wrong thing to do.
The world we live in, we see color, it is what it is. Maybe it did have something to do with it, but I'm sick of him talking about this because ultimately she's gone. Maybe it started off like that possibly, but she has surpassed she's beyond her skin tone. She is an artist who should just be, she's well respected in her own right. She is colorless. And it's like, let's stop talking about this and pitting people against each other. And all the Kelly Rowland is amazing. Beyonce is amazing. All these women are amazing. There's light skin, brown skin, dark skin. We're all amazing. Like, I'm sick
Aretha
of talking about
Franklin, it didn't hold her back, did it?
at all.
I
Well,
mean,
listen,
come
there is
on.
something to be said here.
If you don't add to the conversation, don't try to diminish it. Be corrective promotion. But instead, those two individuals decided to diminish the work that was already built on the already battling struggle of trying to address colorism, and they used their platform to say nothing.
Definitely agree with a lot what Jonathan said, especially with like it rooting back to our history. Like if you go back to, of course, American slavery, we had, and connecting to what Michelle said about, you know, having a white woman being successful, and we had a lot of, you know, a lot of slave owners having these mixed breed children, and then these mixed breed children, depending on their skin color, would either work out in the fields or they were working in the house. So because, you know, I was a bit darker, I would be working in the fields, and then if I had another sister and she was a little bit lighter, she'd be working in the house. And it's something that has been rooted in American history for so long, and like Jonathan said, like there's not enough discussion about it. And then on top of that, we have, I feel like also there's like a familial aspect to it as well, like with people's cultures, especially because sometimes these, through generations, these things follow. And unfortunately, that's very unfortunate, because, you know, with it being a new era, new decade, new century, you know, ideals should be changing. But we definitely see, like, I've seen it in some of my families, and I've seen it in some of my friends' families, where their ideals, those old school ideals, tend to stick, and colorism happens to be one of them.
I'm so glad, Vivica, you brought up the familial aspect, how family, especially in the conversation in the issue of colorism, plays such a huge part. So what we previously talked about is why we believe that this issue still exists. So my next question is, what can we as a Black community do moving forward to make sure this issue is no longer as prevalent in our culture, in our society, whether that be changing the conversations we have at home or just starting them to begin with? What does that look like, that change that we need to see so that colorism isn't such a detrimental issue to our community?
Honestly, corrective promotion. I'm heavy on education. I'm heavy on corrective promotion. Education doesn't just come from the schooling institution, which honestly needs to be corrected in itself.
Well, that's a whole different conversation.
But education from your family as well. Educate your family. Have your family educate their youth. And then if you're religious, the church educate their youth. You know, schools educate, you know, self-awareness, self-love. The concepts in schools aren't even discussed like that in terms of racism and sexism and classism and colorism. Have those discussions out there, you know. Don't wait until they're in college. Start when they're able to process and completely understand, so that when they grow up, they can be effective when they're older and like, all right, this isn't cool. You know, we need to actually have some change. And that's why I feel like the older generation kind of faltered, because they just left us with all the work to do, which is very unfortunate.
It's going to be an uphill battle for sure, but I'm hopeful, because, you know, all we really can have is hope that in the future, maybe not a future we can see, maybe not in our generation, we finally get it, right? We finally learn, we finally talk about this, we finally educate ourselves so that colorism is no longer such a prevalent issue, so that we're no longer our own worst enemy. I'm hopeful that that's in our future. Anyway, thank you guys for this awesome conversation. Thank you for taking the time out. Thank you for being able to be here. Thank you for your wonderful contributions. This went better than I could have hoped for. So thank you.